Alright, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Key to Games podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. It is another very lovely weekend as we are getting close to the end of the year. I am, of course, Josh Placer, and joining me, my co-host, and the developer working on the game as Samurai Pig, Joshua Reyes. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, just realizing how quick the year has gone by. You know that the world is actually spinning faster than the Earth, so
Hmm.
I think I said that before, so people felt that. But yeah, man, busy week. A lot of debugging, some fun little bugs in the engine, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, Chris. Welcome, Rattel. Um, Other than that, man, you yourself staying busy?
Oh yes, working on the book, calling libraries. I have like 10 different videos I need to start working on as soon as I'm done with the book, which I'm now about 75% done with all the image sourcing. So once
Yeah.
that has been taken care of, then I can finally breathe a sigh of relief.
Once you keyed me into what the image sourcing was, I was like, wow, that's a lot, ton of work, ton of work.
Mm-hmm.
Another book,
Yep.
adding multiplayer.
Yeah. But speaking about adding work, we are going to be talking about another major aspect when it comes to understanding game design this week, and that is what it means to study quote unquote bad games. And I was debating whether to put either The Last of Us or Elden Ring in the thumbnail, but Josh voted for Elden Ring.
Elden Ring, yeah, definitely,
But
hands down.
but when we talk about this idea of bad video games, or again, quote unquote bad games, it really has to do with what it means to be able to understand and break down and analyze games beyond just the 10 out of 10s, Game of the Year winners, and so on. And there's definitely this tendency, I think, from a lot of people who are either new to the game industry or people only who cover video games, that they only talk about the best games. That it's very easy to write an 800-word article about why I like Mario, or why I enjoyed Celeste, or whatever. It's an entirely different story if you're talking about reviewing and studying a game that maybe it gets like a 50 on Metacritic. Maybe it only has 5 reviews. Maybe it is mostly negative on Steam. And that is a different story when it comes to studying these games, because there's a tendency, I think, for a lot of people that the second there's a problem or an issue, they just throw the entire game, eject it from the escape pod, throw in the garbage chute, it's gone, we never hear about it ever again.
Yeah, definitely. So, like, getting past that and like actually breaking down, okay, what other than your initial like whatever's throwing you off? Okay, I'm done, I'm out. But in order to stay there and then like really break down, okay, what is it? What is broken with this game? Is it the responsiveness of the controls? Is it the UI? Is it the level design? Like is the audio extremely annoying for some? Like what exactly put together is it that you can take away from a lesson? Because again, like you said, we always this is survivorship basis. We're always looking at these games that have done so well. Study. It's real easy to write about, okay, this game's amazing, this is the best, and this is why. But when we're talking about like why a game doesn't really work, but actually like in a constructive way that we can take away from like lessons, yeah, that's really hard to get at. So that's where we're trying to get to here.
Hmm. And trying to figure out what makes a game not work, that is its own unique hurdle. And like when we talk about, say, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like even with the games I play, like La Mulana, Astra and so on, that there are games that people will like the flip side of this are people who will defend anything. Who will say that even if it's the most annoying, frustrating, it causes 60% churn within 10 minutes. No, the game is fine. It's, the consumer needs to get better. They have to get good at it. And developers will oftentimes listen to the vocal minority when they don't quite understand why is something just not working. And the problem, and to Chris's point about studying bad games as opposed to good games, or studying them more than good games,
Yeah.
is
Definitely.
that if you only play the greatest games, the 10 out of 10s, 9 out of 10s, all Nintendo's titles, and so on, you're not seeing the rough edges. Again, a company like Nintendo, Blizzard in their heyday, and so on, they became famous for making really polished games. A game that it's very hard to find, a point you can say, this is bad in a Mario game, or this is horrible in StarCraft, and so on.
This is bad in a Mario game. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yeah. And when you only look at those kinds of games, it's hard to understand what did the developer do to playtest? What was this game like in its rougher patch? Where could there have been a problem that Nintendo had to resolve? You're not going to find that. But again, platformers is a really good example. Like anything that is very reflex driven is really good when it comes to studying, objective, good or bad elements. Because when the player's the one who has to have the controller or use a keyboard and mouse in their hands, you can tell right away when something doesn't feel right. It's, we go back to the car analogy. It's like getting into a car, you're sitting in the driver's seat, and the steering wheel is on the right passenger door. Like, you'll need to spend an hour to figure out that, wait, someone's not right here.
Yeah, definitely. Never seen. Yeah, I mean, again, like just studying only again, like is really important. I think to really go and study like the bad games again. Like we need to like go and check them out because again, you're like you said, we're not getting the full picture. Like if you're only seeing the best, like the best of the best, and not playing any, I'm saying okay, play Mario and play like Little Big Planet 3 or something, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
feel like the difference in between those two, right? You need to see the differences in between those. So like only studying triple A games are just the best, like highest rated games without actually playing those lower rated games. Like some of those are really good gems that you can take away. Like there's something that maybe one or two things was missing in execution, and that's something you could take and refine. Like say, here's a pain point, here's a great idea, and I could turn that around and fix it, right? So that's like definitely something you could do also from that.
Mm-hmm. To Ratziel's I mean that it's on the door on the right hand side, not that it's on the right side for the wheels on the right. But yeah, like there's a lot of okay to average games that have something unique to them.
Yeah.
There is a topic that was posted on Twitter last week. I think this was from the developer of it was either Ultra Kill or Gloomwood, and he was talking about how many games he's played where the idea is fascinating, but everything else around the game just brings it down. And
Yeah.
that can describe a whole mess of indie games that are on Steam right now.
A ton. And like it's real easy, right? To just start with your core, like maybe that one concept that you have and you want to just kind of flesh that out. But everything around that doesn't really connect or doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
any sense to it, right? And so it's really easy for that. So in that respect, like a lot more play testing or whatever to go around that. But yeah, sometimes just starting with that one, staying with that one mechanic and only relying on that and not letting everything else tie into that, have we said before, that can really be a detriment in those type of games.
Yep, and
Execution is everything, yeah, for sure.
yep, and again, it's why there's that what's that famous adage, ideas are free or implement,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's
yeah. We,
very
we make what? How many game ideas each episode for? At least, yeah.
yeah. I have like dreams of video game ideas I just come up
Right.
with, and that's about it.
Constantly, constant
Yeah.
dreams of them.
Yep. And for a lot of the games that we've played, these issues are very apparent. I think this again is that issue. If you only study really great games and you try and copy those games, to the
Yeah.
letter,
Yes.
you're not seeing the big problems. You're not seeing what can come up. Why? And this is something that we've talked about
What got
before.
there? like
Yeah,
how the game got there, right? Like all the other painful like monstrosities of games or attempts that have had the idea there and they've tried it multiple iterations before, and this one got it right. This one Nintendo'd it, or they,
mm-hmm.
so exactly how did it get there?
Yep, and one of the things that we talk about is that we look at like long-standing franchises. You don't just go from, like with our thumbnail, you don't go from Armored Core to Elden Ring. It doesn't just
Right.
magically go. You don't skip 8 different steps, or how many games I've lost count, how many Souls likes
Are
they've
they
done.
are they redoing Armor Core?
Supposedly there's gonna be a new
Yeah,
one.
a new one, I thought.
And with Mario, you don't go from Super Mario Bros. 1 to Super Mario Odyssey. It takes iteration, it takes understanding, very simply, what didn't we do right in the last game? And if you've looked at any postmortem, one of my favorite parts from the old Game Developer magazine when it was still going on were the postmortems of big games.
Oh
And
yeah.
being able to see that, hey, yes, this game got a 9 out of 10. It was voted maybe top 5 game of that year. The developers still understood they had issues, whether it is from a design standpoint, a game dev standpoint, or combination of the two. And I think one of the big things, I'm sure you'll agree with this as well as any developer watching, is that the game dev side, like mismanaging issues or
Oh,
getting over
jeez.
scope, that is something as a consumer or as another developer, you will never be able to understand that. Again,
Yeah.
how many people play a game like Darkest Dungeon, or they pick any indie game and they think, oh, this game turned out well? That must have meant the game development was, flawless. There were
Flawless.
no issues. The game,
Right.
every version of the game they released had no bugs. All games were bug free before 1999, as everyone
I
knows.
guarantee, like if you talk to those devs, they say it was horrific. I didn't know if we were going to get over the line. The code is held together with duct tape and
Mm-hmm.
gum. It barely works. I don't know how, I didn't expect it to happen. Like every dev was like wants their game to do well, but they never expect like a Darkest Dungeon type thing, right? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Rastel bring up a comment about like bad games and subjective, of course, right? So like he's talking about Spelunky, like that's a beloved game, but someone might consider that a bad game, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but for what reason do you consider it a bad game? What pain points do you experience? And then like maybe you could take those pain points and change them around and make your own version, right? Like we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
before. Like I think sometimes approaching genres or things that you don't like and figuring out how to make it more enjoyable sometimes might really bring out a good experience, just kind of a different experience.
Yeah. And I was just going to bring up that point as well, that the reason why I use air quotes for bad games is that, just as you said, like, a developer doesn't set out to make
Yeah.
a bad game. Like, your goal isn't to make a platformer where jumping doesn't work, or a game that
Yeah.
just causes blue screens of deaths every time you
Yeah.
play it.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to understand a game like this, it is important to understand, and this is something I said when it comes to being able to review and analyze games, is what was the goal of the design? What was the mission statement or the core gameplay loop? And again, like, this is one of those things that I think to some people it sounds like we're talking about something that's very metaphysical, like it's not something that
Right.
is easy to comprehend, but it is once you understand design and the philosophies that go with it, it becomes almost second nature. That if I'm trying to play, let's say, a platformer, and what would be the goal of a platformer? To run and jump and all that. If every time I jump, the jump feels completely horrible, or let's say it's like a Mario Maker troll level times 100, where everything has to be, hitbox precise,
Plus
and
go
just to
to
get through that,
million. Yeah.
that's this is when we again get to that point where we're not talking subjective elements. We're talking something that's very objective. If your platformer doesn't feel good a platform, that's not that's a failure of the design.
Right. So again, like when we're talking about bad design, you need to play, you need to feel
Mm-hmm.
and actually experience like poorly designed games. Cause like You actually have to feel it. You have to hear it. You have to see it. It's an entire experience. It's an art, like it's an art
Mm-hmm.
experience, right? So you can't just go by someone saying, yeah, it's floaty or this and that. Why is it floaty? Like, how long was the reaction time for me to press the button and for the jump to
Mm-hmm.
go,
Oh
right?
yes.
Compared to, so like playing each kind of different variant will give you that. And then you can conglomerate all those ideas into what you think might be an ideal jump rate or precise jump rate for your platformer.
And again, I'm glad we're talking about platforms because again, this was the second book I wrote in the first of the game design deep dives, and
Awesome
it's
book.
for the thank you. Everyone go buy like 5
Yeah.
copies for saying that. But again, there's a general consensus that platformers are easy to build. That oh, I just have a character walk from left to right and they go up. That's not like an Elden Ring or a Doom Eternal. It's easy to do that. But in actuality, there's a lot that goes on under the surface. And again, about studying good and bad games. You can play, if you just play every Mario game, that is your only experience of platforming, and then I tell you, go make a platformer, you're going to try and copy Mario to the letter.
Yeah.
But most likely, you're not going to understand those very subtle tells. Like Rat's Tail's example, Marichum has a different gravity going up than it does going down. A
Yeah.
lot of platformers will do that. They will give you more leeway and hang time as you're going up to try and ease the difficulty of that jump, rather than it's just like that.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll have coyote time,
Mm-hmm,
and then like time dilation on your jump. So, what is it? Less gravity up and more gravity down, I
mm-hmm,
believe, in the coyote time, correct? And so that'll give you more time to like actually navigate the jump. And again, those stuffs are kind of like standardized. Like
mm-hmm.
if you look in your platforming book or any books, like a lot of that stuff is basically standardized. And the ideas and the theories are there. How
Yeah.
you execute them, of course, is different. Go ahead.
Yeah, but like even that example, like when the character's like walking over the edge, and they're
Yes.
not quite on the edge, they just left it, but you still have, like that maybe quarter second that you can jump. That's another
Coyote time.
example of coyote time. And again, that is something that if you do not play platformers or if you don't
Yeah.
study a wide variety of them, you probably have no idea what we're talking about. Um,
Yeah. And
look at
if you played a platformer without that, you'd know instantly, like in a second, once you try to go off a jump, you'd be like, what in the world? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Instant.
why am I not jumping? And even with that, another aspect: how quickly do you kind of lose that jump state when the character is no longer on that platform? Some games it could be like you're like right here on the edge and you can't jump anymore. Because I played platformers like that, and look at something like Sonic. Sonic features an entire physics engine for how
Yeah.
that character moves and jumps and the use of slopes and angles.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who will just say, well, Sonic just copied Mario.
Yeah.
What's the difference between one character walking and jumping to another? But again, it's that
It's
issue.
it's it's like literally two different completely controllers.
Hmm.
Like the character controller, like they're two different like designs completely. Even though you say, oh, they're platformers, but like you said, one's like a physics based like
Hmm.
platformer, and the other one's just like a platformer. So
It's
yeah,
more like an abstracted base
yeah, extracted
system. And
exactly.
this is again like when we're talking about these points specifically, we're not discussing the subjective nature. We're not talking about the games as art element. We're talking about how do you make something work and is functional. Again, going back to the car analogy, we're right now talking about how do you make sure someone turns on the car, turns on the engine, and it starts, and the car doesn't explode when you try and steer it. And this
No
is
blue
this,
screen car.
yeah. This is the kind of stuff that if you don't get it right, everything that you build on top is not going to work. And I have played so many platformers from so many indie developers where it doesn't work. That the second I start moving and jumping, the frown starts appearing on my face. And if I'm feeling like that within 5 seconds of starting your game, guess what? that's not going away. That's not something that is going to make me keep playing your game for 10, 15, 30 hours. And this is again why you need to study games that have issues, because this is the kind of stuff that if a game doesn't get it right, you find out immediately. And like I said, like, as we've been talking about more reflex-driven games, these are those things that, as a polished professional developer, Nintendo, well, Valve, and so on, that stuff gets hammered out. Like, you will, as a consumer, you will never experience a janky Mario game. Like,
Yeah.
Nintendo would, kill the messenger if anyone tried to leak a horrible build of a Mario game.
I wouldn't even try. Will you imagine trying to
Mm-hmm.
like kamikaze that leak out of the Nintendo headquarters?
Mm-hmm. Running out the door as the drones come in. Basic character feel. Yep, to Rast Hill's comment again. When we talk about feel, and to Chris, the drones and the ninjas would get
Ninjas. Yeah, drones and the ninjas.
that. When we talk about basic feel of a game, this is where a lot of developers, first timers in particular, are going to mess up on, because if you've only studied the best examples, you're not seeing that iterative step of going from, horrible janky to better to, hey, this game feels great, to now I want to play this game over and over again. And to Thomas's comment, yeah, a certain level of jank can be charming. Again, there's a reason why people like stuff like Getting Over It and Jump King. But if you're trying to learn a game, yeah, there's a difference between jank and broken. That jank works if it's like a very specific aspect. Like we talk about a game like Jalopy, for instance, that one where you have to like build the entire car and it's done, piece by piece. But when you're doing jank, it has to be focused. Again, if Getting Over It was all janky, like if every single aspect of it, even just like trying to start the game was janky, people wouldn't have that. But if you make it very focused, and again, where we see a lot of like the simulator crowds go for, Euro Truck Simulator, Bus Simulator, and all that, it works because it's very much about, we're going to make driving this truck the most complicated, over-the-top thing you have ever experienced. Spin tires and that whole, what was it, Snow Runner, Mud Runner, that's another great example. But even with that said, you still need to make the game approachable. Because yes, someone who wants to drive a truck in the mud that is 100% realistic, that is an audience. But is that an audience that you can build an entire franchise or earn back your money off of? That's a different story.
Yeah, again, and like how are you talking about focus? Like Getting Over It was very focused, and like that's how it was marketed too, right? So it wasn't like accidental, like jank or like bugs. It was made that way, specifically focused to be that way. So.
Exactly, and that's another big point, that something that we've talked about before, that for games like Jump King, Getting Over, even something like a Papers, Please, or Return the Obra Dinn, these aren't games that were made with flaws that you cannot like. It is well within your right to not like Getting Over It or Papers, Please. But there's a difference between making a game intentionally like this and making a game with these issues because you didn't know better. And that, I think, is very hard to get across to a lot of people. And Dwarf Fortress, I think, is another really big example.
Wow.
Yep, and it's coming out on Steam. And again, people have been dreaming about, an approachable Dwarf Fortress. And
why?
Maybe it will. Again, with their, and again, if they can nail that,
it's a true dream, though. I mean, if you can nail it, it's amazing. It would be amazing.
And speaking about Dwarf Fortress, How many Dwarf Fortress Lakes and colony
Yeah.
simulators have we played over the past 15 years? How
Yeah.
many deck builders and FTL clones and Darkest Dungeon clones, and we can just again getting over it. And again, there's a difference between saying I'm just going to copy this game warts and all, and say I want to copy this game, but I want to do it in a different way.
Right.
And again, it's very different to do that.
Right. So that's why, like, when we were talking about, like, when you're analyzing, like, good game design, you're like, okay, well, not every game, no game is perfect. Every game has flaws. And so
Mm-hmm.
you can go into the perfect games and you can analyze the flaws, and you can look at bad games and analyze the flaws also. And again, see how they all accumulate together. Like we were talking about in like horror games before, like just say if I played, I don't know, the some of the best horror games out there with excellent level design, and I don't have issues with my inventory, and I don't run
Mm-hmm.
out of matches. But for some reason, I didn't happen to play the other thousands of horror games where I only have two matches, and I can't see, and the level design is poor. And if I don't play like a poor horror game and understand what would make it poor, and I just think like, okay, this is what's good about a horror game. Of course, you're missing out on all of that, right?
Mm-hmm. And even with games that have like really solid execution, that doesn't mean that again they did things 100% perfectly. And as we said before, there's a difference between a game that works for a very specific or niche audience and a game that works for, let's say, bringing in new people. And like I've talked about before, a lot of the mobile and free to play games, there's
Yeah.
a massive difference between saying, hey, everyone liked Flappy Bird or everyone liked Candy Crush Saga. So that must mean that if I make a better Candy Crush or Flappy Bird, everyone will come to my game. It doesn't work like that. Because there's a difference between an audience for a game and an audience for a genre. And as a developer, as we've said, your first goal should be to make a game for a specific audience. If you don't know who's going to play your game, you're not really going to be able to design an effective product.
Hey,
But
and if you're making the game for yourself, know who yourself as an audience is. Because I've heard people say that, well, I'm making it for myself. Well, who are you? Like, who
mm-hmm,
is your who? Like, this. Think about it like that. Who am I? Who would my audience be if you're having trouble identifying your audience? But yeah, like first, like your game has to be made for an audience. And so, like when we're talking about a game being bad, it might not be marketed to the right audience. It might not have the right marketing or trailer or anything, or get it across on the type of game it is, and thus it can come off as bad when it's not actually a bad game, right?
yeah. Look at all the roguelikes and roguelites. That if you label your game the wrong like, it can annoy a lot of people.
Would No Man's Sky be such a like when it first came out, if the way it wasn't marketed as it was, and it just came out as just, I don't know, a No Man's Sky game, but not hyped up so much with like, and that's a good example, right? Not only like study how a
Mm-hmm.
game is marketed. Poor marketing can give you a lot about how things not to do, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to extract what worked from a social like a social media program that worked, or marketing that worked. There's a lot of things that have to work together. So like, but you can definitely tell what didn't work and like some marketing, and you can see it through like cringe, or just like didn't work, or thumbs down on the YouTube algorithms and stuff like that. So definitely analyzing things that didn't work also in marketing programs is also really important too, to know what not to do or how not to operate a Patreon or a Kickstarter or something like that, for
Mm-hmm.
example.
Yep. And when you're trying to convey to someone what your game is about, that is its own nightmare. And again,
Yeah.
there are a lot of games that are on Steam that are considered bad, but maybe they just did poor marketing. That
Mhm.
no one ever heard about the game.
Yeah.
No one even knows about. Again, Steam, like any algorithmic driven platform, sadly, it's about how well did you do day one.
Yeah.
If your game sold, 500,000 copies on day one, that's going to be objectively better than a game that, let's say, sold 2 million copies, but let's say it took 4 or 5 years for it to get to that point. And let's say there were a lot of dips in terms of that. I mean, again, look at Among Us. That no one, and I mean no one, knew what Among Us was
No.
until it blew up. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. Like I love 6 or 7 games actually. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was a big like when a double A was kind of a thing before like indie. That was like my indie before indie existed. Like I would enjoy double A games, and usually they were rated 6 or 7 because of budgeting, or this was of course back when, but of course because of budget or just constraints. But usually like they were niche, and of course they were
Mm-hmm.
missing one, usually just a little bit of here and there in execution.
Yep.
Again, you can study that and figure out what you could do or change, and adopt it for your own game.
Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to grow your game beyond that initial fan base, so again, the goal, as we said, is that you need to figure out what your audience is. What is your core gameplay loop? But then you need to start looking at, how do I make this palatable to a wider audience? Because again, UI and UX work is something that benefits everyone. It makes your game easier to play, it keeps your audience interested in your game, and also improves your own skill as a designer. And here's another really good reason why you should study quote unquote bad games. A lot of them are lacking when it comes to UI UX.
Yeah.
And like we've said, it's easy to play a game like a Mario or a Half-Life or whatever, or Last of Us and so on, and say, okay, I love this game. It does all this stuff right. But to be able to look at a game that doesn't do things right and be able to understand and explain, why doesn't this game work for me, and goes beyond just saying, this game is stupid, 1 out of 10, I hate this game, or developers are lazy, and that kind of thing. And UI UX is often where a lot of developers will slip up on. Volume sliders. Again, how many indie games have we played and that are considered release, or they're at the demo stage, or advanced demo, and there's no ability to control volume?
Yeah.
Or here's another favorite: they don't let you turn off vibration on your gamepad. Like, there's literally no option to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've gone over. I don't know if it was Chris or Rat, and they were talking about, I work on uh character control first, make sure it works first. I've harped on this many times. Whenever you're prototyping anything, please have your gameplay framework, such as your menu, working. Have your menu like working first. I promise you. If you work on your game and then you try and add your menu afterwards, it kind of makes things a little difficult. Get your menu first, have a win state, have a fail
Mm-hmm.
state, and make sure your menu and your UI works. All that stuff, again, and I've said this before, if you have problems coding it, because like you said, for some reason the Rumble won't work, well, you have to actually code that in depending on what engine you use or what have you. If you have trouble coding that in, there is plugins and is options that are available if you use most engines. If you use Godot, if you use Unity, if you use Unreal, there is an option that is available for you to do that. So I always recommend get that menu done first, and then after that, make sure that works. Because again, how many times that's the first thing everyone looks at when they start your game up. It's the menu, and it's the first thing they see. And if your menu is garbage, that says so much about everything else. It doesn't
Yep.
matter if you. It doesn't matter if I spent so much time on the level design or if I did this or that. It's always going to be in the back of your head that the menu was garbage. The first thing that I see in the game was not good. So
Yep.
please.
And Chris has a really good point there about being able to articulate why something is bad or why something doesn't work. And again, this is one of those skills I picked up from studying so many games, that it is a very rare skill, I feel, to be able to look at a game that you hate, that you cannot stand to play it, and still talk about what this game does right. And I think that's what I hope is what kind of elevates me as someone who studies video games. That I can play a game that I just cannot stand. It's just not the right game for me. And I
Yeah,
can
you sure can.
still write a positive review. I
Yeah.
can say that, hey, do you like rhythmic puzzles and solving math challenges and all that? Well, then this is the game for you. As someone who has
You know what,
no
Josh?
rhythm, this is not for me.
I say I don't know how you do it. I see you playing some amazingly niche games, and you just get through them, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean articulate, and that's what we're talking about, like studying the game design. You're not playing it and like, okay, I don't like this. You're like, why don't I like it? What's not working about this? What is working about this? So you're actually dissecting the game while you're playing it, and that's the important thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And even little things that they don't sound that big in terms of UI and UX work, they can do a lot to improve your game. Let me give you an example. I was looking up Ast Libra while we were talking in terms of the churn rates. So, in terms of its churn rate, it's actually really good. That it only loses like 2%, 4% between achievements. So, that is, again, something that means that this is keeping people. That is what we normally see.
Yeah.
However, the very first achievement, just literally getting one of the first skills in the game, there's a 20% churn. So within 20 minutes of playing this game, it lost 20% of the people who, bought it and turned the game on. And again, there will be people who will say, well, this aspect of the achievement rates is good. So that means that the game was fine, there were no issues. But I can definitely, I can tell you, I could, rant for the next 20 minutes about what the game did at the start to cause that churn rate. And this is the kind of stuff that, as someone who studies design, that it becomes important to comprehend. That yes, I enjoyed Ast Libra, there we go. It will probably be one of my favorite games of 2022. But I can give you a notarized list of every single pain point and difficulty spike that that game has. And these are issues. These are things that stop people from playing. And if you only listen to that hardcore fan base, the people who have probably have gone through Ast Libra, they have either 100% this game or they are doing every single thing in it, they're going to declare the best damn game of 2022, and how dare you criticize it. Just like how people are probably doing the same thing with Elden Ring
Elden
as we
Ring.
speak, or
Yeah.
the new God of War game I think is either out or coming out very,
Coming
very
out.
soon.
Yeah, a few days.
But again, if you cannot understand the issues, what stops people from playing, you're not going to learn that. And
Right.
it's something that we've seen from a lot of developers who they'll say, well, my game sold 400,000 copies, or let's say it did sell 1,000,000 copies. It succeeded. How dare you say I didn't do something right? But then you check that churn rate, and it goes 50 to 20 to 10, and then it stabilizes at 10%. And you will never, unfortunately, hear from the vast majority of people about why they stop playing your game.
Yeah, a game can totally sell, and people they can stop playing it immediately. I've done it so many
Mm-hmm.
times. I purchased the game and churned out of it quickly, and didn't go on message boards and talk about it. And
And you probably
that's
didn't refund it. You just,
no, and I just it's what it is.
it's shelved, on our ever eternal backlog.
Yeah.
And again, a developer will say, well, who cares? I got their money.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the point. What's a chance you're going to buy the next game from that developer? Or the next game? And this is why we talk about from the game dev standpoint, that a studio can put out one very niche, unique game, and then they'll fail and collapse the second or third game in because they don't have an audience. They think that because 800,000 people bought their first game, that their second game could do, let's say, 1.2 million. But let's say 600,000 of those people said, ugh, and they refunded, or let's say just put it away. Those 600,000, they're not coming back for the sequel. So you think that you're going to be selling 1.2 million copies, and let's say you only get 150,000 copies sold, and you budget your entire studio on the former. You're kind of in big trouble. And as I said, it's why when I look at studios, I don't follow, or I don't really care if one game did amazingly well. I want to see what your whole portfolio does. As a studio, your goal should be growing. If, 10 people bought your first game, let's say 30 people bought your second, and then 100 people bought your third. And right now, I'm giving a lot of indie developers, PTSD as I'm saying this. But again, you want to be showing growth.
For some of the devs you were making it be like, really? That's okay. That's
yeah. Oh yeah, and to Chris's comment, exactly. And Steam does not make it any easier, sadly. There are a lot of games where it's impossible, or it's near impossible to figure out, okay, is this their first game? Is this their 15th game? Especially if the store page only links back to the publisher. So then you think, oh, this developer did, they have 80 games under their library. No, that's not it. Yep, and again, it's why it becomes very hard for a lot of developers to grow beyond a niche. That, again, you can say, let's say your first game sold 1,000 copies. It is a success. For you have made a profit. You have that audience, and you think, well, I can do no wrong at this point. And then your game starts to get noticed by more people, and all of a sudden, you have forums of, I can't play this game. What's going on? This game is broken. And you've kind of lost that lightning in a bottle. And it's unfortunately something that we've seen from a lot of developers. When they start getting noticed by more people, it means that you're growing beyond that niche audience. That the people who are willing to put up with the issues, who they don't care if the menu is confusing or the first 20 minutes make no sense to your game. They are, 80 to 500 hours in. They don't care about that. But the new people do. And the people who could potentially become your audience going forward do.
Right. Onboarding.
Mm-hmm. Playtesting. Oh yeah, of course, the criticism. Yeah, from the creators of a popular game that did well, we see that from a lot of games, or they'll say this is copy, or we're basing our game off of this, and this.
Yeah.
Because we talked about the challenge of combining genres in an earlier episode.
Yeah, and the genres in the blender. There's a lot of good. That's a good episode to watch for a lot of good game ideas.
Mm-hmm. That's where we got the Plants vs Zombies racing game.
Yeah, racing game, car part simulate, car harvesting. And Rat's Tail, the egg trainer onboarding experience. Yeah, a little work on that. It was. I stuck with it for a little bit. It was there though.
Yeah, and again, this is why you need to look beyond that initial audience when it comes to play testing and learning these things, because people who are your friends and family, or the hardcore players, they're going to stick it out far longer than someone who just stumbled upon your game on Steam, or maybe they watched a video from a Markiplier or a Northern Lion or a Game Wisdom, hopefully, and they want to try this game, they load it up, and it's a horrible first experience. They're out. And they're not going to come back.
Yeah.
And I want to look up as another example of this with La Runa, a game that was my favorite game of 2021. That when I look at the churn rates for it, it went 15%, and it actually has stabilized quite a bit. But again, it has lost 15% before they've even gotten their foot in the door, before they've even gotten their toe wet in that game. And people will say, who cares, Let's say the game had 5% churn, 10% churn at the start. if it kept everyone else entertained. But again, all these issues are compounded. And people are far less willing to deal with issues if it's your fourth, fifth, sixth game,
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than it's your first game. And if you don't understand these points, it will come back to haunt you. And it's why I think I think this is one of the worst things from a lot of indie developers, when they become so stuck in that rut that they are just almost metaphorically just making the same game over and over again. It has the same issues over and over again. And you're either not noticing it, or you just don't care because, well, people didn't mind in the fourth game ago when I did this, so who cares about it now?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you that is definitely commonplace where flaws continue on through series is definitely.
Hmm. And it's rare. Like, again, like when we look at games that work really well, it's oftentimes a rare occurrence for a sequel to legitimately fix the issues with the first game. The only two that come to my mind would be something like Ori, and how much it grew and improved from the first game, and Assassin's Creed. Going from 1 to 2 like that was a huge jump. But for everyone else watching, can you think of a game where the sequel radically fixed any and all issues that were in the first game?
Jeez.
Uh,
I gotta know. I gotta know. Someone has to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just a side note. Well, if someone's thinking up that, yeah, like using your other game's name in your description in your Steam, that's like terrible. Please don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Banjo Kazooie spiritual successor. Oh no,
Ukulele. Nah.
ukulele or Kaylee.
Oh yeah, there's another game by them.
Yeah,
But yeah, like in terms of going from game one to game two or two to three.
yeah. Like it fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not gonna say. I mean, Metal Gear. But Silent Hill.
Maybe, yeah, Silent Hill could maybe count there. Definitely not Devil May Cry, as
Not
everyone
Devil May
knows from Devil May
Cry.
Cry 1 to 2.
Not Spelunky.
Don't use your game to. Yep. And again, like we see a lot of indie developers who will do that, inspired by so and so, or,
Yeah,
this game
yeah,
is just like this.
yeah.
And yeah.
And to me, when I see that comparison, when I say it's just like this, I'm like, definitely a number one. It's not right. Your game is nothing even close to it. If you're even if you're inspired by it or not, like telling me that it's inspired, that's doesn't add anything to the game, right? The game should sell
Mm-hmm.
itself on its own. Um, to me, it's more like downgrading of your game because you're like, hey, that's where it came from. I didn't, so
Do anything else with it.
yeah, I couldn't do anything else with it. Exactly.
How many Stardew Valley likes have we
Yeah.
seen over the past like 5 to 6
Yeah.
years? Hey, it's
Ton.
just like it. Hey, you're on a farm. It's like Stardew Valley, but even more cumbersome. And
And they're still coming out. They're making them more hardcore. They're still doing them. I
mm-hmm.
don't
Oh
understand.
yes. And again, if all you do is look at one game, the very best example of that genre, that is your only reference point, you're not going to see what is a bad version of this game like. And again, this is where we have that difference. There is a far cry of a difference between playing Super Mario World and playing Bubsy. Or playing
Yes,
Friday the
Jackrabbit.
13th, the game. Or what was that?
Yes,
Yeah.
just Jackrabbit or Friday the
Oh,
13th.
yes.
I was hoping Friday the 13th would come up. The NES version, right?
Yep. Or Jaws. Or
Jaws.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. If there's a really
Oh,
dated reference right there.
dude. Jaws. I still get chills from that game. Oh my gosh.
And here's the other interesting point. Just because a game is quote unquote bad, or it's a game that, has a 20 out of 100 on Metacritic, that doesn't mean it's all bad. maybe
Nope.
there is something interesting or a unique detail about it that you can apply to another game or
Might have
to.
really solid combat, cool mana concepts, or like leveling systems in there. There might one thing again. Every game usually starts with one idea, and usually it's probably pretty
Mhm.
good because it got produced and it made it somewhere. Everything else surrounding it, maybe not so much, but there's always something. There's always some lessons you can take away from every game. I think
Yeah.
that's the main.
Um, how about like with the original Friday 13th, the whole idea of swapping between characters and have to keep people alive?
Right?
That in of itself,
Super cool. Super cool.
you could build a game around that.
Yeah.
And again, that's this point that a
Ag-
mechanics, like individual mechanics or even just a system itself, is not objectively good and it's not objectively bad. Again, weapon durabilities. I am not a fan of durability systems in games. Does that mean they are horrible and they're like throwing paint on a Picasso? No,
Some
but
people love them. Some
yeah.
people love them. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to fix my weapon. I don't want to play this game.
Mm-hmm. And to Chris's comment, yeah, and that's another big point. You do not want to directly copy a game. We've played games where it just literally feels like the developer just, hit Control C, Control V, and then let's say they just, instead of a green character, it's now a purple character, and they call it a day. Um, how many Vampire Survivor likes have I had the pleasure of playing over this year, and how many more will I
A lot
probably
more.
play into
A lot
2023?
next year. Next year is going to be the year, Josh.
I'm
Uh,
waiting.
uh, Also, like durability systems are critical to a game's economy. I'm going to say it's just one of the ways to handle your game's economy.
Yeah.
There's other ways to do it.
And again, there is no right or wrong answer when we're talking
Right.
about individual mechanics and systems.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always about how they're
Get better.
implemented.
Yeah.
And again, you you may hate, one game's durability system, someone else may love it. They
Love
may
it.
say, if you take this out, I will never play this game again.
Yeah,
And
they dreamed of Monster Hunter's durability system at night. They love it.
yeah, and again, this is why understanding what your core gameplay loop is and what is the intended interaction is a big deal. And I'm glad you mentioned Monster Hunter. Look at Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter World's
Yeah,
entire mission statement was, let's
come on,
make this
man.
game approachable.
Yeah,
Let's make it the biggest and best version that it can be. And
yeah,
guess what? It became Capcom's best-selling game. It has beaten
yeah,
Resident Evil as a
yeah.
franchise.
That's wild. That is wild. I mean, originally it was like you have to have carpal tunnel syndrome and read a fact at all times in order to beat the game, which was cool. It's like, I mean, if you did it, then you
Mm-hmm.
were like, I was like, wow, that dude plays Monster Hunter. He's
Mm-hmm.
hardcore, like so for sure. But definitely like accessibility for everybody, great onboarding, like yeah, and then it's a
Good
huge success.
tutorials, yeah. And again, you do not go from having no game to Monster Hunter World. It
Right.
doesn't work like that. And
No.
it took Capcom and developers they had to sit down and say to themselves, why don't people like this game?
Yeah.
And that is very hard to do as a developer, to sit down and say, well, I screwed up on this. This part isn't right. I can see why 40% of the people stop playing right here. And it's why you have to study issues. You have to study the good examples as well as the bad examples. And again, like we said, sometimes a bad example could have been a great game,
Great game.
but it could have been either death by 1,000 cuts or just one issue that completely screwed up that system.
For sure. For sure. There's so many gems that's why I mean, like, if anything, take away from this, like definitely don't play this the nines and the tens. Like for real, go play like the fives and the fours and the sixes and like give them a chance and check them out and just see and then sit down with your journal if you're studying design and say, okay, what's good about this? What's wrong with this? And that will help. That's a great exercise for you to do because it's more popcorny and you're going to take less away from just playing like a really good game. Your brain's going to turn off more. You're going to be like, oh, this is the best, man. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're playing something and you're really trying to, okay, why is this bad? What could I do? How could I change this? That is really good. Great exercise for you to study game design.
Yeah.
And also, go ahead, Josh.
And I was going to say, and as another challenge, write a positive review for a game you didn't like. A game that you
Yeah.
cannot stand. That
Yeah.
this would be a game that if someone paid
Tony.
you, hey Pony, if this was a game that if someone paid you to play
Yeah,
it,
man.
you would say, no, I don't want this. See, write a review, write why someone would like this game.
Love it.
And again, this is where you start to figure out why something works and why something doesn't work. And again, you're going to spot these issues more and more in a game that has, a quote-unquote bad game rather than a good game. And as a developer, here's a very big point. Anytime you're studying a game and something doesn't feel right to you, or, something is just like, again, like that record scratch moment, sit there and realize that if it's affecting you like that, most likely it affected a lot of those consumers. And going back to that point about, food and, understanding why something tastes wrong or tastes right, it's the same thing with video games. 1,000 people can tell you 1,000 different reasons why they didn't like a game. It could all very well just be the same issue, just explained 1,000 different ways.
Different ways. Exactly.
You get past the stairs. Yep, and like we've said, people are more, and as a quick time check, we're about an hour in. I say maybe another 15, 20 minutes if that works for you.
Yeah.
Like, people are more willing to look over issues if it's a first game that they've played. And this is, again, another big point that we've talked about. And this is something that Josh mentioned earlier, that even great games have issues. I can, itemize problems I've had with Celeste, Darkest Dungeon, Factorio, Resident Evil, Elden Ring, exactly. People are more willing to look past issues if it's A, the very first game of its genre. Again, if you're the very first Factorio, people were willing to look through, look past a lot of the onboarding problems with Factorio because there was no other Factorio. Just like how there was no other Dwarf Fortress or no other Europa Universalis.
Yeah.
The other reason people will look past an issue if it's kind of considered a prestige game. It's that game that everyone can't stop talking about. Your Elden Ring, as an example. That I am willing to bet a lot of people kept playing Elden Ring because it was named Elden Ring. And it came from Software.
Definitely. I was going to ask Josh, compared to other Souls games, would you say your playtime in that is less than other ones?
Well, if we're talking about game length, I think it took me longer to play Elden Ring, simply because it was such a larger game.
Oh, yeah, it's a big game, though, yeah.
Let's see, I had just under 100 hours. I did restart like 3 or 4 times with different characters.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking. Maybe it was only like 30, 40?
Maybe somewhere around, at least for the winning character.
Yeah, winning.
But again, how much of those hours did someone enjoy?
Yeah.
And like we've said, a quality experience is better than quantity. It's better for someone to leave your game smiling and happy after 5 hours than groaning after 50 hours.
50 hours, please. Yeah, because I felt that's how I left Elden Ring at first. I was like, yeah. And then I was like, oh. I wasn't sure if it was like too much birthday cake on a trampoline with, I don't know what was wrong, and horses. I don't know what was wrong toward the end, but yeah, man, I was ready to get off the ride.
And again, it's that unfortunate.
Oh yeah, Guacamelee, yeah, that was a good paced game, man.
Yep, Guacamelee was fantastic.
Yeah.
And yeah, to Indivisible, I haven't played more of that game yet. Again, issues like when we have those pain points and those confusing stop issues, this is why playtesting really matters, because there are people who will quit your game after 20 seconds, and there are people that if they run into a pain point 10, 15 hours in, they're just going to stop playing it. And that is the worst kind of experience, that you've been enjoying this game for 20 hours, and then you just hit that brick wall, and it's so demoralizing to want to play that
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
And let me see, I'm looking up another game.
I didn't play Guacamelee 2 though. I did not. I love the first one so much. I beat it like twice. I didn't play the second one for some reason. It was like, again, like we've talked about it with the sequelitis. Was it really necessary to have a second one? You know what I mean? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
one is just right.
Yeah.
All you need.
And like as another example of a game that you can definitely
It
study
was good.
for
Okay.
issues, there's that game of Soldiers that we played earlier this year. Like the most beautiful pixel art I think I've ever seen next to like Owlboy. That when I look
Oh
at
yeah.
the
Oh yes,
churn
yes, yes,
rate
yes, yes.
for it, it lost
Okay.
literally half the player base before they even beat the first dungeon in that game. And that is a huge issue when it comes to onboarding. And again, how you present these things to players. And to go back to the Factorio example, I have played a lot of Factorio likes and very like logistics minded games that the onboarding is non existent. And again, someone will say, well, Factorio didn't have a good tutorial, so why do I need one? Well, the answer is very simple. You're not Factorio. Just as, if you are the second Souls like on the market, you need to make sure you don't have the problems of the first Souls like.
Yeah, yeah. You cannot have you cannot be like, well, Souls had a really bad UI, so I'm gonna have a bad UI. No, have a good UI, please.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know if I got back to the comment Rat mentioned, and I've always harping on that menu, and it's like for prototyping and stuff like that. Just real quick though, like so, if you when you are prototyping and you're working on the game design, and this is initially, and this is to prevent at the end, and because so many times during the gameplay cycle, what held up the most and what cost the game the most was the menu, and that's because we were like, no, well, the game's more important. We can do the menu later, no problem. But actually, that's not the way it works. So getting that
Mm-hmm.
in first, and so the game is kind of all hooked into the menu, and you don't have to worry about that, and all those settings are there. And so that way, every streamer and every Josh that plays the game is like, oh, thank you for having the audio sliders. All that's there already. Don't worry about it, and then you can focus on the gameplay. So
Yeah.
just, I'm not saying don't ignore the gameplay. I'm just saying having that first and having that down is just something that should be standard, and you shouldn't even be
Yeah.
like up for discussion.
And I want to touch on something else about Elden Ring for a second.
Yes,
Because a
waiting
lot
for it.
of people defended issues that Elden Ring had. How many times did we see people on Twitter say, oh, you couldn't find a tutorial, screw
Yes,
you, or, haha, take that, or, oh, you're having trouble reading the map, haha, blah, 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 and all that. And then From Software said, you know what? Those are issues. Let's fix them. And it shut all those people up. And this is again why little things matter, and why even in the very best games, there can still be problems and pain points. And a really good designer, if they hear about those problems or they start seeing people talk about them, they're going to try and fix them. And if they can't fix them, they will do whatever they can to mitigate that, or they will make they will sear it into their brain that for their next game, they're not going to make that mistake again.
you got it, Josh.
I couldn't find a tutorial. And like we said, a lot of this goes back to understanding why are people playing this game and why are people not playing this game. And it's very hard sometimes understand why they want it. And to Pony's comment about stamina not draining when it
Yeah,
comes to being outside of combat, that again, that's an annoying pain point that we see in a lot of video games.
That was so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a bug at first. I was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm just not in comp. This is awesome." And like, you can imagine, like, what a pain point that is, right? Like, you're just there, just kind of waiting around. All of a sudden, there's a skeleton, but you were goofing off and you have no stamina, so you die. That's
Mm-hmm.
really annoying, right? But
Yeah.
go ahead.
Or, the stop and start. How many walking simulator games have I played? It's like, you can run, but you can only run 5 seconds at a time, and then you gotta
No
wait
way, man.
4 seconds for it to
No way,
start.
man. No way.
Mm-hmm. See, I'm the one who has to play these games.
I
I do
know.
it on the
That's
stream. And again, these are issues. They are something that they're not related to the core gameplay loop. And if you can smooth those out, if you can get rid of them for your game, it's going to make your game play a lot better. And again, if someone is coming to your game for whatever reason, they have no loyalty to continue to play it. Again, a From Software game, every From Software fan is going to stick through it. They are
yeah,
going to, any pain point, they are going to close their eyes and cover their ears. They don't care. They are going to
yeah.
play that game all the way through. They are going to fight every single boss and every single annoying section. But for a new player, they don't care about your name. They don't care about your game. If they turn it on and that menu doesn't work, or they go into the options and, it's that stock Unity development build menu template.
And I'm maidenless. Oh, I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and to Pony's comment, like, there are a lot of, like, roguelikes that have that same issue where the entire screen is the map, but you can't fast travel where you've been. And little things that improve your game, even if someone doesn't bring it up, it's still internalized that the game feels good to play. Monolith that I really enjoy. It's kind of like that shmup bullet hell roguelike that they let you teleport from room to room instantly as any room you've been to. It's a really great feature. It's something that's not in the Binding of Isaac. But again, people will say, well, if the Binding of Isaac didn't do it, why should I? Let me just copy them. But a smart developer, when they see an issue, they're going to try and fix it.
So a dance based shmup.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, that hurts, Pony, right there. You got and you gotta play Mile. Yeah, rounds. Yep. Oh yeah, good mapping in a game. That's another 40-minute discussion if we're not careful. Let's see. I don't think there's any other points. Anything that we didn't discuss yet from your side?
Let's see. Well, other than the marketing, those follies that can happen, I think we basically covered. Yeah, I think we basically covered all of it, Josh.
Right. So I'm thinking if there's anything else that I missed. We talked about good games. We talked about bad games. And again, I would say, I guess, to sum everything up, you should study. If you're trying to build a game of any respective genre, even if you're trying to mix genres,
Yeah.
you want to play a wide spectrum of those games. The good, the bads, the everything in between. Because this is how you learn both what works and what doesn't work. And like we've said, there are plenty of examples of very innovative games that did something unique and different, but they didn't stick the landing. That the core gameplay loop is there, but everything else doesn't work. And again, the reason why we study all the games is because this is how you start to see that iterative process. That there is a difference in platforming between playing an Ori or playing any LJN game back in the 90s and playing a Mario game or even playing a Zelda with how the character moves around. And anytime you spot something that you don't like or it doesn't appeal to you, that should be a warning in your head that I shouldn't put that in my game. Even if it is in an Elden Ring, or it's in a Factorio or a Mario game. Just because it's in a game that's a successful game doesn't automatically make that a good thing. Just as, even if something is in a bad game, doesn't automatically mean that it's bad. As we've said, mechanics are not good or bad by default. Oh, oh yeah, the can't do things in bulk. That always drives me crazy too.
Yeah, but I mean, like basically, like you said, Josh, like a good exercise for everybody to do is to definitely like play some of those play a game. If you don't like Rat Tail, you don't like Spelunky, why don't you like Spelunky? Like play it for a little bit, write a review about it, like Josh said, a positive review, what you would change, maybe what you would do. Why don't you like it? Is it that specific genre, or is there certain tenets or pain points in there that annoy you, right? So, like,
Mm-hmm.
for sure, play a ton of like those mid-range or low-end games to understand, especially in your genre when you're mixing genres. And also if they contain like mechanics, right? Like, I don't know, they have a mechanic that you might include in your game. See how they did it differently, right? Maybe this one game did it really wild and really cool, and you can utilize that or change it and adapt to it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
definitely one of my endpoints there.
Yeah. And being able to look at why a game works and doesn't work is very essential for any
Yeah, man.
students and first time developers watching this. Because, like
Yeah.
we've said, at the end of the day, anyone can write about why Mario is enjoyable, why they love The Last of Us or God of War. But it takes someone who understands design to be able to A, talk about why those games wouldn't work for someone, and B, play lesser examples or games that didn't do well and understand, well, why did this game do wrong and what did this game do right? And when you start examining designs like that, it makes it very easy to spot these issues. Again, like I've said, that I can play a game for like 20, 30 minutes and dissect almost everything about it within that short period of time. Again, there's a difference between someone like me playing a video game and your general consumer playing a game. And the general consumer is important feedback, but they're not going to be able to tell you, oh, your platforming physics are incorrect. You should fix that. You're not going to
Where's
see
your
that from a general.
there's no coyote time. What happened? Your jump
Mhm.
gravity's inverse, bro. Like they're not
Yeah,
gonna tell you that. So yeah, so definitely. Again, and we've said that before, like play testers, alpha testers, beta testers, all those testers, you're gonna get different feedback, right? So like when their consumer is gonna be completely different, and they're not gonna sit there and like I say, if I don't like it, I'm not gonna sit there. I'm not gonna like. I don't have time to go to a message board and say why I didn't like it or why not. Or so a lot of times, like that message will go unheard of. So for sure, playtest, playtest. What else? What else was it, Josh?
and
Everything else.
onboarding, yep.
Onboarding.
And to bonus on about Spelunky, I threw a rock into a wall, hit me, knocked me into a pin, killed me, I think, in like 4 seconds. So I think
For a
I beat
second, yeah,
your death run right
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah. And again, look for ways of always look for ways to improve. Anything that you can improve
Wait,
going
hold on. So
from
no one likes Spelunky in the chat at all?
oh good, that's gonna go well when this gets out. When this goes into the mainstream audience, this is gonna be fun. And the Elden Ring comments too. This will
In
be
Elden
cool.
Ring. The Elden Ring and Spelunky just study
Hmm.
those ones. Sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
But again, like look at how a game works and doesn't work for you. And when you're trying to copy or, be inspired by, there is always room to improve. Whether you are a first time developer or you are a Naughty Dog or a Nintendo or or anything in between. Again, Mario is a really great example that it has been fine tuned and polished to a T. But that comes with years of designing those games with play testing, with onboarding. Like we've said, a Mario game at its basic level is can be fun just moving Mario around. As a first-time developer, it is highly doubtful you're going to have your first iteration of your game being that enjoyable.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time to grow and work in these spaces.
Yeah, definitely. And remember, like the game, like again, just we've said this before, but like it should feel good, like without graphics. Like the graphics aren't going to make it feel good. So
Mm-hmm.
you is that me? Are you hearing something? You
Uh-uh.
should be able to like play the controller and just moving around should feel good, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like whatever the core gameplay mechanic is should feel good. And then everything else you add on top, the juice and the audio and the sound, that's just accoutrements. But the basic underlying core, how it feels moment to moment should feel great, right? Without anything else additional.
Mm-hmm. And again, you're going to need to grow and improve to get to that level when it comes to
Definitely.
onboarding.
Definitely.
But I think that's it. I think that's a really good point to end on. Anything
Yeah, no,
else?
that's solid, Josh. I think that's a good one to sum it up there.
All right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
with that, we still need to figure out what our topic is going to be for next Saturday. And as always, if you have suggestions for us, let us know in the comments. Be sure to check out the Discord and the Patreon as well.
Yeah, definitely. And my links are always down below. Don't forget to wishlist Samurai Pig. Follow me. Well, I don't know about the old platform, but follow me
Yeah.
and and join Josh's Discord. Buy some books. If you have any ideas for the next episode or for comics, let us know, please.
Yeah. We will be back next Saturday around 5:30 p.m. ET here on the channel. And tune in for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, everybody, have a great night and a great rest of your weekend.